Welcome to Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. It's like coffee with an analyst, or it could be whiskey with an analyst reading a spreadsheet, linking crime events, identifying a series, and getting the latest scoop on association news and training. So please don't be that analyst and join us as we define the law enforcement analysis profession one episode at a time.
Thank you for joining me. I hope many aspects of your life are progressing. My name is Jason Elder, and today our guest has 3 years of law enforcement analysis experience, with 9 years of law enforcement experience overall. She started as a public administrative specialist, moved on to officer, then became an analyst, then an investigator, and then now she's back as an analyst. She holds a master's in public administration. She is currently the vice president of membership for the Carolina Crime Analysis Association. Please welcome Kassie Langdon. Kassie, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on here. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
All right. So during the prep call yesterday, I realized that accidentally I have gone through most of the executive board now for CCAA. After today, Kimberly Cummings will be the only one that I haven't interviewed. So Kimberly, if you're listening, you're now on my list. I will be targeting you sometime in the future, but we've had Amanda Bruner, Caleb Meyers, and just recently we had Damian Williams on the show.
I might be a little biased, but I think we have a pretty amazing board, so that makes sense.
Yeah. So we will talk a little bit of CCAA later in the show. But let's first talk about you specifically. How did you discover the law enforcement analysis profession?
Yeah, so I always knew I wanted to do something in law enforcement. I didn't know what. In college, I actually minored in forensics, thought I was going to go the CSI route, ended up interning at Wrightsville Beach and working towards patrol. Well, on patrol, I worked a lot with the Wilmington Sting Center and met a couple of the employees there who were intel analysts and realized that a lot of what I like to do, what I was good at, and what I found interesting was actually crime analysis. And so I started kind of doing what I could in my sworn role to gain those skills. And yeah, it kind of lit a passion. And obviously I've kind of gone back and forth a little bit in my sworn versus non, but
we welcome both on the program.
Thank you very much. But no, ultimately I think I'm pretty sure this time that I am staying on this side.
Never say never, but yes. Yeah. Good to have you. Okay. So you finish up your you finish up your bachelor's degree in 2015. And as you mentioned, Wrightsville Beach Police Department, but you're starting as a police administrative specialist, right? Is that as you're waiting for an officer class to come aboard, or what is that intermediate step there before becoming an officer?
Yeah, so my very last semester of college, we were required to do an internship, and I interned with the Wrightsville Beach Police Department. And a part of that internship, we had to do one day I sat in with records, which is the administrative specialist. One day I shadowed the detectives, and one day I rode along with patrol. 2 weeks before my internship finished, the administrative specialist position became open as she medically retired. And I was like, oh, well, there's my foot in the door. I sat down and talked to Chief during the interview process that obviously this is not where I want to be full time. And he said, well, do you have interest in patrol? I said, yeah, I think it would be a good place for me to start to figure out where I actually want to go with my career. He said, all right, we'll send you through basic law enforcement training. Give me 2 years on patrol. I was like, so you tell me you're going to give me a job and then another job. Okay, I'm in.
Yeah, serendipitous, right? It's funny how I'm talking to different analysts and talk about how they got their foot in the door and how just sometimes the cards fall in just the right way.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. And honestly, me working in records has helped me so much as an analyst, because I knew, we had Southern software for our RMS system, but I did a lot of entering by hand. Yeah. It was not connected to CAD. There was a lot of manual stuff, but I also, because we were a CALEA agency, did some very basic level analysis to meet CALEA standards and pulling some stats, doing some forecasting just from skills I had learned in college. And I would put together literally a 1-page thing once a month. So it really did help start my analysis training, even just on the most basic level.
Yeah, so you were even doing analysis before becoming an officer. And I can imagine that you were there about 2 years as a specialist.
Yeah.
And I can imagine even being in the office as a specialist helped you because when you became a patrol officer.
Yeah, it definitely did. I mean, granted it was a small department, there's 25
Mm-hmm.
total
Mm-hmm.
sworn, including the chief, but I got to know everyone really well. The investigators would talk to me about their cases and what they were working. I got used to listening to the radio because the radio was in my office because at one point in Wrightsville Beach's history, they had their own dispatch. So I got used to doing that, querying CAD for things. So I knew how to work most of the systems that I needed on patrol. I knew how different supervisors operated. It was just a giant, like I knew all the 10 codes before I even started, because they still operated on 10 codes. So it definitely helped. It was quite an exhausting period getting to the point of being patrol, because I worked Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, normal business hours, because when the public came in to do records requests and so on. But then my basic law enforcement training was at night, 6 to 10 p.m.
Oh, wow.
And it was, so worked at Wrightsville. I lived in Wilmington, which is kind of the midway point, but I went to Brunswick County for basic law enforcement training. So I had a little bit of commute there.
How far was that?
It was about 30 minutes, and it kind of depended on the traffic, because this is when that bridge from Wilmington to Leland was still under construction. So during any peak traffic times, it was a nightmare. So that was, Monday through Friday, it was at night, and then pretty much every Saturday and a couple Sundays. So I pretty much worked 6 to 7 days a week for about 6.5 months. I was exhausted.
Holy cow, that's 12-hour days consistently. So that is a lot.
Yeah.
And so I know you have a toddler, so you're probably like, I can't imagine doing that now.
Oh yeah, there's no way. I hear about some people going back through basic law enforcement when they have kids, and I'm just like, power to you.
All right. So then as you go through the training, get hired on as an officer, I guess take us back to those first couple days as an officer. Maybe what surprised you, or things that you think about now when you think back.
I just remember the first couple days being on patrol after having sat through 6 months of academy, going, wow, I thought I learned so much, but I feel like I know nothing. And just still having so much to take in during field training, and really like learning the hardest part for me, and I feel like a lot of officers actually have this, is confidence. When you're out there, it makes such a difference in your interactions with individuals, in your officer safety. You have to have the confidence that you know what you're doing, you know what the state law is, you know what the policy is, and that's not an easy skill to learn.
Yeah, and I would imagine that is in particular as working on patrol when you're doing traffic stops.
Yeah. So when I finally got released from field training, I remember they're like, okay, like you're on your own, you're in your own car now. They're like, we'll still be nearby, because I mean, it's a small island. Like when you stop someone, we're going to come and we're going to be right there, but you're on your own. I remember my first traffic stop, I was on night shift, and I was shaking because I was by myself for the first time, and I'm shaking. I'm walking up to this car, shaking, trying to not show that I'm shaking. And the poor, like, it was a college student girl. She was like 19. She was also shaking. So we're both like, okay, like we're gonna be okay. And after that interaction, I remember just laughing at my car. Like I'm like terrified of this 19-year-old girl. What's gonna happen to me, right?
Nice if you like hugged it out.
Yeah, I just remember like I had like called for backup because I was like stopping a car by myself. Yeah, no. I like it took me like getting through that and kind of laughing at myself after to really get in the flow of being a patrol officer.
Oh, that is good. So, and then what I guess, because it's a fairly small jurisdiction and town, I mean, what are the main issues that the police department faced at this time?
Yeah, so one, they have this full sense of security on the beach. So everyone likes to leave their property outside and unlocked. So we had a lot of larcenies of various things, whether it be bikes, surfboards, what have it. So there was always that. And the other thing is the beach bars. So we did foot patrol every night, especially on the weekends. We had to be out there from like midnight to like pretty much when stuff cleared out. Bar closed at 2, so between 2:30 and 3, we were out there on foot because those beach bars, you'd be shocked at how many people get in there when there's 4-man officer team and there's 1,000+ people in these bars. It gets a little hectic.
Yeah, and you had just mentioned about confidence. I mean, that's another degree in itself because with the traffic stop, it's at least one-on-one, or mostly, or maybe one with a couple of people in the car. Now you can get in these situations with these bars where you might be talking to only 1 or 2 people, but you have this huge audience around you.
Yeah, and this is where I always talk about like your soft skills, how important they are. I knew every one of the bouncers and bar owners because during day shift I would come around and I would talk to them and like I got to know their life stories. And before this, they didn't have the best relationship with the police department. I don't really know what happened before I got there, but I knew their whole life stories. And so even if I was the only one out on foot patrol, my squad wasn't there yet, I knew if I got in a fight, I was going to have a wall of bouncers around me.
Yeah.
So being able to network and get to know it helped with that layer of security.
You watched Roadhouse, didn't you?
Maybe.
No, that's really good that you did that. You just said 4 to 100,000 or 100. That's not good odds, even though you have weapons and backup, right?
Exactly.
All right. So then one of the things you mentioned in our prep call yesterday is during this time, you're learning how to be an officer, but you're also leaning into data and doing very analysis type tasks just on your own.
Yeah, so luckily in being a small department, especially during like the off season, you really get to take your work in whatever direction you want. So if you're interested in doing just DWI investigations, you can do that. If you're interested in doing drug investigations, you can kind of take it to the next level versus just handing it off to the investigators because we only had 2 investigators. So I found myself watching a specific drug crew, and it actually started on my first foot chase, which I tripped, of course, during my first foot chase. I got drugs off of this one gentleman, and from there I started noticing him multiple times during beach bar hours, like coming with the same group of people. And from there I started looking at our reports. I was like, hey, he was arrested at my arrest where he had this guy in the car with him. This other guy was arrested by the other squad, and started building out those associations. And then I started watching and kind of like looking, I was like, all right, well, what days are we seeing them here? And started noticing patterns. And I ended up making my own association matrix for this crew of drug dealers that were hanging out at the beach and figuring out when they were most likely to come down, what bar they were using, and kind of what vehicles that I had seen, because those ones were, they used a lot of vehicles, and then for a while they used Uber, so that one was a little bit harder. But I put all this together and ended up giving it to our investigative captain, who was like, we don't have the resources or the time to put into this. And I kind of got shut down. But it was a little disappointing. But I ended up, because of that, I made contact with the Wake County Vice. And I was like, hey, is there anybody I can share this information with? There happened to be an investigator that was looking at one of the guys that was on my association chart. So he came down to the beach. I explained to him all of what I had put together, the CAD notes I had looked at, the reports, who he was hanging out with and when. And he was like, this is great. And here's my contact number. Next time you see them out, shoot me a text message. So we went back and forth for a while. I would kind of be his on the ground of what information I could get, because if you approached any of these guys, they were going to scatter. They had lookout, and they knew as from me arresting the first one that I was watching them. So ended up every single person on my association matrix, Wake County, I keep saying Wake County because that's where I'm at, the New Hanover County Vice, put them all away for trafficking amounts.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So,
way to not take no for an answer and just find a way.
So yeah, that was, I ran into him at court like a week after they had been convicted, and he's like, oh, I forgot to tell you. I was like, yes.
Yeah, that is awesome. It just, because it can be very demoralizing when you put all that effort in there and you just not told no, and there's no like compromise. It's just no.
Yeah. Dealt with that a couple times.
Yeah. Awesome. So I see here we get to the point where you're transitioning from being an officer to a analyst, you have some overlap time here. So you're still at Wrightsville Beach Police Department, but then you're also working as an analyst overlapping at Wilmington Police Department.
Yeah, so I went to Wilmington full-time as an analyst, as an intel analyst in their Sting Center. This is where I really started to get my like hands-on actual analyst training and train with other analysts. But I wasn't quite ready to give up my badge at that point. So I stayed reserve with the Wrightsville Beach Police, but because they were so short-staffed, I ended up working most weekends that was with my old squad to kind of fill in. So it was my like part-time job at that point.
And you're still a reserve?
I am.
I think I know what that is, but what does that mean?
So it kind of means something different for every department. Some departments, it means they're holding your officer certification for you. You do your mandatory training each year, and that's it. For the department that I'm reserve at, you have to do 8 hours of patrol work a month, and that could be from working events to filling in on patrol. It kind of depends. And as long as I do those 8 hours a month, they keep my certification for me.
Yeah, that's a bigger commitment though. Right? 8 hours a month it sounds easy, but life happens and you got a bunch of stuff going on. To put in 8 hours a month is a commitment.
Yeah, it's definitely the scheduling, especially with having a toddler, I found is a little bit more difficult than I thought it was going to be originally. But like this Friday night, I'll get off of work from being an analyst and I'll go over and I'll do 6 of my reserve hours, essentially making sure that this one shopping center does not get hit with their problems. So
is that like a after hours paid detail that the business requests of the police department?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and it's interesting that they do it that way, because obviously something like that task is way different from working patrol and way different from where you're pulling cars over versus dealing with drunks at a bar, right? Like that's very different task that you're doing. But hey, not that you're complaining, you do have to put 8 hours and you get it where you can.
Yep, I try to take those type positions. One, because it keeps me from doing reports. Not that I have a problem with reports, but it keeps me out of court, right? Because court takes me away from my full-time job, and I don't want it to interfere with my primary role as an analyst.
I got you. So you're getting set up pretty well here. As we mentioned here, you got a little bit of records experience, and now you got a little bit of officer experience, and you're moving into this role with intel analysis, and you're getting training and working with other analysts, as you mentioned. During this time, as you're honing in on your analyst skills, is there a particular task or maybe a particular concept that surprised you? Maybe it was a bigger struggle than you thought it would be, or maybe there was just something that you were surprised by as you were getting more formal training as an analyst.
Yeah, I had never done anything with mapping like ArcGIS or use like official association tools like ITU, for example. So I had no idea what I was doing. And I remember we put out a weekly document. Each of us were in charge of our own district, and that whatever that district's crime problems were, putting together a section in the larger weekly intel document to go out to patrol. And they're like, all right, here's these tools. This is what we put in our sections. We always include a map. They included little icons for the different crimes and everything. And I was like, okay, gonna figure this one out. So luckily they kind of had a separation with intel analysts, and there was a more traditional crime analyst who was able to help me with the mapping sections and really making sure I knew which patterns to look at. The kind of like he did more of like the comp stat stuff too, which gave me like a starting point to really start honing in. So yeah, it took me a little bit of time just to take in mostly the analyst mindset over an officer.
And that's where I want to go to, because I'm imagining at this time you're putting together these analytical products, but from your point of view at this time, you're still coming at it from the officer mindset, I would imagine. So you can put in there like, oh, what would I want to see if I was receiving this when I was on patrol?
Yeah, so that part actually, like, it became my benefit, because we put these products together. Even if it wasn't that one, I would see there's a couple analysts, they like to write these giant paragraphs, and they were great information. It was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And especially as the new analyst, it was kind of hard, but I had to go up to them and be like, they're not going to read that.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, what? I'm like, don't get me wrong. It's great information. I'm sure you worked really hard to put all this together, but it is way too long. They are not going to read it. I know, being a patrol officers and working with other officers, if they're not the like most proactive officer, that is too much.
Yeah.
So it was a balance between finding, that what's important in the analysis, but also what is actually going to translate and be received.
Yeah. So do you have maybe a thought in mind in terms of what that bulletin should look like? Is it like 4 bullet points? Is it bolding certain terms? What is it in terms of the actual words? Do you recommend that analysts put in a bulletin such as the one you were working on?
Yeah, I was like bottom line up front. People talk about that a lot with analytical writing, including that with keeping it simple. If you're the shorter main points up front. So I always, in any department I've worked with, if I've made a bulletin, I'm going to separate your case number, your offense type, your location, like making that real obvious, along with like any suspect name out at top. Don't put that in a paragraph. It gets lost in the mix. It's okay to include that later on if you need for more details for someone who's going to look at it more in depth. But always think of it like a resume. When you turn that into an employer, they're supposed to do like 30 seconds is how long they take to review it. That's pretty much patrol with looking at bulletins. They'll make it real obvious, short, sweet, to the point, and then you can include details later if they really need it. Officer safety stuff or stuff like I put in red. I bold it in red. Anything in red to me means you need to look at this right now. I actually had one of the investigators I work with ask me yesterday. She's like, I noticed you use different colors. I was like, yeah, you noticed it was red, didn't you?
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned putting the most important thing up front, and I learned that the hard way as an analyst. I did a presentation once in which, again, I put a lot of time and effort in this, but I did it as if I was like maybe a screenwrite. Like I did, it was like the big reveal was at the end. And so I was like building to this whole thing. And basically the command staff said that last slide should have been your first slide. I was like, but that's the big reveal. He's like, you do the big reveal at the beginning. And I was like, oh. So, but I get it, but I had to learn that one the hard way.
Yeah, that's definitely, you want to include all these details and how you got there. I think a lot of analysts were like, but we did all this work and we want to show you. They need, as my husband likes to say, short declarative sentences. And it's something even, I don't know if it's just how the female brain works, but like we want descriptions. And I think on top of being an analyst, like it's just like, I want full explanations and all of this. And he'll look at me and be like, no, short declarative sentences. And that's a patrol officer, short declarative sentences.
Yeah. Think about how certain folks' brains work, right? To me, I rather have 3 or 4 bullet points to read that as opposed to reading a paragraph. And it could be the exact same words in that 4 bullet points, but for whatever reason, the way my brain works, I will pick up the information faster if it's in bullet point form as opposed to paragraph form.
I feel like most people are that way, but that also comes into play with knowing who your audience is. It's like you got to know who your patrol, who your command is, and what format works best for them and which way they best take in information, because everybody's different. And that can take a little while, especially when you're starting somewhere new and learning that. So I usually start like, this is how I see it. Give me feedback.
Yeah. And it definitely can be difficult for analysts as well, because you may be thinking that you're writing this bulletin for your department, and then it gets shotgunned out to various departments or various different audiences. And so that gets a little bit more difficult to try to be more general.
Yeah. My other big thing about bulletins, if it's not necessary to have multiple pages, don't. I have seen some departments, they'll have like a 5-page bulletin with like just all these pictures, and some of the pictures are more like duplicates, and I'm like, this is way too long.
Yeah.
Like get the best shots you have of the suspect, the vehicle, whatever it is you need. And the reason you put your contact information on the bulletin is so if they need that more, people can reach out. But having a 3 to 4 page bulletin is too much.
I know. So you need to sign up to be the contest judge in these bulletin contests for these conferences.
I know. I actually thought about submitting something this year, but we'll see. We'll see if I get approved to do so.
Yeah, or just kick everybody else's butt and enter the contest, right? All right, good deal. So then you move on from Wilmington to then back to being an investigator. This time you went at the North Carolina Department of Motor Vehicles.
Yeah, so I was with the North Carolina License and Theft Bureau, which is under DMV. It actually, I had no plans on immediately leaving crime analysis. It was just a series of circumstances with family life. Our house flooded during Hurricane Florence. We wanted to move closer to family. It was like that perfect storm where we were moving to the Raleigh area and I needed to find a new role. And I was like, okay, what am I going to be interested in? There was no analyst positions open in the area. And I was like, okay, well, I do love the digging part of my job. I love that on patrol. Well, let me try and be an investigator. And so I went and did that. I had to do an 8-week live-in academy to be an inspector, and then was assigned to Durham County, where I investigated title fraud, identity theft, cloned motor vehicles, stolen motor vehicles, did dealer audits and investigations, inspection station violations, pretty much anything dealing with cars. Very in-depth and interesting. DMV paperwork, let me tell you, it's a nightmare. Yeah. And I was assigned to Durham, which the motor vehicle theft rate pretty decent there.
Yeah.
So it was definitely busy. It was interesting.
Was it more administrative? It almost sounds like it's a shift down to what you were doing before, and it's kind of more along the lines of just more administrative task and dealing. You mentioned the motor vehicle guide and whatnot is in depth, but it almost seems like, oh, this is a lot of minutia, and it's a little bit of downshifting in terms of the pace that you were dealing with up till this point.
Yeah, so it was really 50-50. So we had like 50% administrative where we're doing audits and that kind of stuff, and then 50% like our investigations. So I had a lot of title fraud investigations where essentially someone stole the title, signed somebody else's name, false notaries, that kind of stuff that I dealt with, and a lot of dealer investigations dealing with like bank fraud and how they're selling cars. And it's kind of hard to explain without explaining all of the DMV paperwork. So yeah, it really depended. And unfortunately, during like a section of my time there is when COVID happened. Then things really slowed down.
Yeah.
A lot of our investigations would stem from, if they weren't from people complaining on dealerships or whatnot, stemmed from doing these audits. And we were not supposed to go and do them because of COVID for safety reasons. So we just kind of hung out in the office waiting for our administrative work while COVID was happening.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
That is tough. But I'm guessing that during your training and your time here, that still North Carolina, you're eventually going to move on to Cary Police Department as an analyst, which we're going to get to in a second. But I imagine that the stuff that you have learned here as an investigator with Department of Motor Vehicles has helped you as you went back to analysis at Cary.
Oh yeah, there's several like tips and techniques that I learned while I was there. One of it is really where I started doing my OSINT work, because working with a state agency, they didn't have a budget for all these fancy tools. So I got deep into that, to a lot of Facebook Marketplace type investigations. Also, just in North Carolina, the color of a car is not on the registration anywhere. So if you don't have like an LPR image or something, or some kind of history already with that vehicle, finding the color of the car could be really hard. But through there, I was able to find other free resources to law enforcement that were able to connect us to such a simple thing, really. I also still worked with analysts for license and theft. It's their fraud unit is where all of the analysts are housed. And the lieutenant at the time, knowing I had come from Wilmington and doing intel analysis, whenever they had a big case, she would actually bring me in and kind of oversee what the analysts are doing, if there's any way I could help. We had one, there was a translator case where there was hundreds of licenses that were possibly going to have to be revoked because the translator was giving them the answer.
What does that mean?
So like if you have to go do your driver's test,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't speak English, at the time you could hire, and I think they've changed this now, it has to be DMV provided. At the time you hired your own translator to come in and translate the test for you to be able to take the test.
Oh, and the translators were giving them the answers to the questions. They didn't know the answers to the questions, and the translators were giving them the answers.
Correct.
Ah.
And so the link analysis to that was fairly in depth, and I worked with the analysts that were there to and help them clean up how it looked, because a lot of the analysts had started as DMV employees and then kind of got shifted into this role, so they were still learning how to be analysts themselves. So I worked with them on that and teaching them how to import pictures into their link charts and all that kind of stuff. So was still very much connected into it.
Yeah. Now you got me thinking, like, how does that DMV work? I would imagine there's just like various languages for the test.
Yeah.
At least that's what
I
I
know
would guess.
they've definitely assessed how they do it now. I know they've made some changes. I don't know what they are, but
it'd be funny if the way they figured it out is like, man, these folks that don't speak English have a 100% pass rate compared to English speaking that have like a 63. Like
yeah, exactly.
That's
like,
funny if they looked at the
odd.
results. like you're like, why do they pass 100% of the time?
Caleb Meyers with Garner Police Department, and my PSA is put the phones away. Man, we live in a society now, and I'm a culprit of this as well, is I've never had a clearer mind when I put that phone down and when I think about some other stuff. So, and there's so much to learn out there. I mean, this can go for anything, right? At the job, at home, on the road. You see it everywhere. We're so attached to our phones. And like I said, it's just better to put it down and to just learn something else, do something else, because you're going to have a clearer mind. You're going to be fresh for whatever you're about to tackle.
Hey y'all, it's Josie Blong from Salisbury Police Department. My public service announcement is that you are not as busy as you think you are. You just need better time management skills.
All right, well, let's go through the decision then to go back to analysis. So your transition from the Department of Motor Vehicles to Cary PD. What went into that decision?
Yeah, so my husband is also a police officer. And knowing this is during COVID, things were slowing down. There wasn't going to be a lot of career progression for me where I was at, because it's a state agency, and if you want to promote, you have to be willing to move. And that's not something we decided for our family wanted to do. I was like, I can't go to another agency as a sworn officer because the schedule is going to be all over the place. Being that my husband's also on patrol, we would never see each other. And we knew at this point that we wanted to have kids. And so I was like, all right, double that down with just the liability of having two sworn people in the house and the chances of one of us ending up injured or something. I was like, it's time to move back towards analysis. And while I was looking, the spot at Cary opened up, and I waited about 6 months after I put in the application to get a call for the interview. I was like, oh, they must have hired someone else. And my husband, because he works at Cary, he was like, no, he's like, I haven't heard anything. And I was like, well, I haven't either. So I just assumed that maybe they've got somebody else.
Yeah. And fascinating, I learned this yesterday during the prep call that at Cary, you replaced Beverly Lewis, who I've had on the show previously. So that's interesting that's a nice connection there. So 6 months later, you finally get the interview, and as they're transitioning to a new analyst, like, what are you being asked to do? What are the problems that you're looking to solve?
Yeah, so I got there, and it seemed like the admin very well knew the work that Beverly had done. She had made some awesome dashboards, but the patrol level wasn't sure. And when I was walking around asking, like, okay, what did the analyst do for you, trying to find the different units, it seemed like there wasn't really a clear picture of what the crime analyst role was within the department. Even though she'd done some amazing work, they just didn't know it. So I was like, okay, we gotta fix that communication piece. So when I first started, I was housed within records under the records supervisor. And they're like, we're also being based on your background, we're going to move you upstairs with the detectives. So you're still going to be in charge of this data piece, maintaining dashboards, building out anything, data related requests, public requests, those sorts of roles. But we're also going to use your intel background and see if you can help investigations, doing the more complex cases, linking trends, those sorts of things. And I was like, great, this is perfect. So once I got upstairs, I feel like it took a little bit for the investigators to be used to having an analyst up there and wanting to share what they had with me. Because like, I remember the first week I walked around and I was like, all right, what you got? And everyone's like, nothing. I'm like, you don't have any cases.
Don't look at my
Nothing
piece of
at
paper.
all. Yeah.
I just see them covering them like they're grade school folks, like covering their piece of paper that's on the desk. Like, don't look at my stuff.
Yeah. Luckily, one of the investigators, Larry Ariano, who is now retired, came from California and had worked at department who had analysts and understood more so their role and what, if you give them the chance, analysts can be able to do. And so he was great with sharing stuff with me. Or he'd be like, this is my suspect, this is the MO, what do we have regionally? So he would give me something to dig on. And I think like them seeing what I was able to do for him is what kind of opened up the other investigators to being a little bit more willing to share their cases.
I think it's interesting that you were getting a little bit of pushback, and maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but before you told me that, I would have guessed like, oh, since you're coming in as a former sworn, they would be more open to you because there's that kinship of sworn.
Yeah. So no, yeah, you would think, but there was definitely a vibe of sworn versus non. And it took a little bit of time to break down that barrier.
All right. So then in terms of Cary Police Department, I mean, how large is this department? What are some of the crimes that you're investigating?
So a lot of it's property crimes. Yeah, Cary is pretty safe. I mean, it always makes the like top 10 safest. I think it's technically a town of Cary cities. So it's mostly property stuff. But being where we're at in the region, a lot of it is very much connected to Holly Springs, Apex, all of the surrounding smaller cities. We all kind of get hit at the same time. So you really have to be interconnected with those agencies and be able to piece all those together.
Yeah, North Carolina does seem odd to me that it just seems like you have these cities or towns that are really close to one another. Like you talked about Raleigh, Durham, and it seems like they're all patched together really closely. So it would make sense to me that once one area sees a pattern, y'all might see the same pattern.
Yeah, we definitely do. And I think when we get these, and it comes in waves to the region, felony lane gain activity because of the thoroughfares from Florida up just runs right through North Carolina. So, and usually they'll circulate an area for a couple days and then be gone again.
Yeah, that's very transient. That can be really tough. Very seasonal. All right. Well, let's get it into a specific case then. This brings us to your analyst badge story. And for those that may be new to the show, the analyst badge story is a career-defining case or project that an analyst works. So we're here in Cary. It's 2023, so just last year, and you get your case.
Yeah. So I had started helping the ICAC investigator do backgrounds on his cases when he got in a cyber tip. And I had started doing this when I had some downtime. I had low number of requests in, like we were doing pretty good. I had some downtime and it's like, man, I have this one username that I cannot figure out like who it is. We've spent the last 2 months trying to ID this guy. And in 5 minutes, I came back in and was like, here's his real name.
Nice.
From that point forward, he was like, you're my person, you're my OSINT person. And so I had started doing backgrounds for him and doing all of the OSINT work to kind of help triage his cases as they came in. And we had one come in and I had been a little bit busier at this time. So I was like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to get to your background. He's like, hey, the cyber tip shows is a really young age range, even for cyber tip. So do you mind taking a look at this? Because I don't know if I'm going to be able to like fully find everything. I said, okay, let me take a look. And I was able to identify from vital records that there was a child in the house that matched the age of what was being viewed in the cyber tip, which instantly escalated the tip. And they, like, next day were at the house to deal with it. Due to them escalating it, they were able to do their search warrant, everything, and get that child out of the house. It did end up being, it was a hands-on case, which the cyber tip originally came in as a priority E, which I'm not sure how much you're familiar with that, but priority E's are electronic and they're kind of considered the lowest level priority. So had we not done that OSINT background, we wouldn't have realized it. And
so you mentioned that it's I get that it's level E and it's electronic, but then you said it's a
hands-on.
Hands-on case.
The tip came in as electronic because it was flagged from the suspect using online means to transmit the CSAM. But once they did the investigation, they got to the scene and did their search warrant, they realized that the child that I identified that lived in the home was actually being hands-on victimized.
I see. I didn't pick that up. Okay.
And they were able to arrest him and get him out of the house. At this point, because of how many cyber tips that were coming in and the workload, some cyber tips weren't being dealt with for months, just based on like triaging. And it was my triaging of the case that got it handled immediately. So it made me feel good to know that she wasn't going to be victimized again. Granted, this poor child, like, obviously already had that happen, but knowing that she's not going to be again. This actually just recently went to court and he was found guilty on all accounts and has like a permanent no contact order with the victim. But based on the background checklist that the investigator had, we wouldn't have found that she lived there. And it's such a simple thing. I know some analyst bad stories, like, they do some complex work, and those cases are great. They're absolutely great. To me, this one just meant so much, knowing that I like helped, played a role in saving this child. Makes all the difference. It's like why I got into law enforcement in the first place, to help protect children, and was able to help do that in this case using just basic OSINT skills.
Yeah. So what did you use that to identify that there was a child in the house?
Yeah. So starting with the subscriber, we got when the tip comes in, you get the subscriber address. Ran that address, identified who all lived in the home, started running the adults in the house, went into vital records and found their marriage date, and then went into query birth certificates, and starting back from the time they were married in Wake County as a starting point. Sometimes I had to get farther back just because you're not married doesn't mean you can't have a baby. But I use that as a starting point, and queried with the same last name from the date they were married to the present, and then went through the list of names and was able to find a birth certificate record with both the parents' names on it and the child's name and her date of birth.
Oh, see, I assumed. This is why you don't assume. I assumed that this was a step parent situation. So that makes it even worse. All right, yeah, and those are tough cases. That is some really heavy stuff. I know they teach you this as officer training or investigator training, and you can certainly try to prepare yourself for something like this. But this is mentally, this is a different animal in terms of how it can weigh on you.
Yeah, it definitely takes a toll. When the week it went to trial was actually the CCAA conference, and I was getting updates from the investigator. He would call me on the breaks, like, hey, this is where we're at, this is testifying. And when he texted me the verdict in the middle of a session, and I started bawling in the middle of the CCAA conference. Good tears.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it definitely takes a role. We had something I had started with our forensic and ICAC and a couple of the other investigators while at Carey. We called it Mental Health Monday. And during our lunch break, once a month, we would bring a board game in and just go into the coffee room, play board games. If anybody walked in, we would ask them to join us, and just for an hour, just disassociate from what's happening at work and enjoy time together.
Yeah, nice. I like it.
Yep.
I like it. What did you call it?
Mental Health Monday.
Mental Health Monday. All right, nice. All right. And then I just back to the case real quick though before we move on. Do you know what the defense was, or what were they challenging certain evidence to be thrown out?
It's mostly trying to defend the process at which the cyber tip and stuff was looked at. So the investigator got the cyber tip and was able to view what the material was that was being transmitted. They were trying to argue not having a search warrant to view the information essentially withheld within the cyber tip, which is something that's federally has already established a standard, but not in North Carolina. So this is actually the process which our ICAC investigator goes through that information and starts his investigation was not established. And it may end up case law. We'll see. They'll probably appeal it. But if it passes appeal, we'll have the standard in North Carolina for protecting children.
So when you say there's a federal standard, that means on the federal side, they don't necessarily need a search warrant if the threshold is met with one of these cyber tips.
Yeah, so they need, like, to get into the Facebook and all of that, the further information, yes, you still need your search warrant, you need your ESP, but just what's included in the cyber tip itself, you don't. Yeah.
You don't. Okay. And that hasn't yet been established in North Carolina, that process.
No. A lot of these don't go to trial. So
yeah, interesting. Okay. All right. Well, hey, let's move on then. And one of the topics you want to make sure we cover today is mentoring other analysts, which I can imagine you as a mentor has to be pretty awesome, given all the stuff that all the cookie jars you have your hands in throughout the years. But just want to give you an opportunity to talk about mentorship.
Yeah, I just find it so important, especially because I had a weird road in figuring out, and not everyone's going to start on patrol. That doesn't work for everyone. And figuring out what does it mean to be an analyst? Where are the lines of my role versus an investigator versus an administrative specialist? Because unfortunately, too many analysts get treated as kind of the catch-all, right? And also training can be hard to come by. Besides, webinars, how are we getting the training in between? Especially you go to a department, they have one analyst and everyone else there is sworn. Who's going to train them to be an analyst? And I've been lucky to be a part of associations and get my skills from other analysts. I cannot, like Amanda Bruner, love her to death. She doesn't even know how many skills she's taught me. Charlie, our whole board has taught me something. The first conference I was able to go to, Damian Williams taught on doing dashboards in Excel. And that there was a couple things that I had not been able to do in Power BI just because the way our system, our RMS was set up. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the answer right there. And then I went back and was able to put together a dashboard that was actually for drugs and vice, that incorporated what they were already tracking and just automatically made them a dashboard. So
now, was it pretty easy to link the data into the dashboard so you didn't have to do too much manual labor?
Yeah, and it literally the supervisors, they were tracking their activity already in a spreadsheet, and they literally, when they went out to do like a buy bust or a trash pull or whatever, they were just like putting the date, that, and if they got anything, right? And so pulling that into a visual to show their activity, because that's not something they were tracking in RMS or CAD, and still having their visuals for their supervisor, who that's how they operated. Yeah, it didn't take any more work on my part. Once I set it up, it was there for them.
I gotcha. And then Power BI. Make the case for why an analyst should learn Power BI.
I'm all about automation. If there is a way that you can do something once instead of 50 times, why not do it? Being able to connect tables to do more complex analysis, or be able to pretty much whatever question patrol could come to me with, I probably have a dashboard that's going to answer that question without me having to do more work at that moment. So I'm all for learning it, because one, even if you say your IT is not set up where you can have a SQL server or something like that. Like when I first started at my latest agency, I was pulling the RMS data into Excel, and then I pumped it into a Power BI. Once I had the Power BI set up, the only thing I had to do to update my visuals was query in RMS the last week of whatever incidents and copy and paste those lines from Excel into the Power BI, instead of rebuilding out a comp stat or whatever was needed. It makes it so much easier. There's so much you can do with it as long as you know how your data connects, knowing the relationships between them. It makes life a lot easier. It really does.
Yeah. And you have recently been, I think you said you were a co-founder of a Power BI user group.
Yeah, so CCAA has started a Power BI user group, and essentially is a working group to help each other get through our Power BI issues, because it's not the easiest thing to learn. And I am an advocate of everyone can learn from everyone. So as confident as I am in Power BI, there's still, I know some people out there that do some amazing things. Or there could be a project that somebody's working on that could be really beneficial to my department, but I'm never going to know that unless we're talking about it. So it's a way for us to engage in what we're building, what we're doing for our departments, what problems we're having, so we can kind of come together as a group and problem solve any issues we come up against, and then also kind of provide some kind of training. And the training's not just going to come from me; it's going to come from various sources. During our first meeting, I identified another user who's really good at I don't know why I struggle to say this, paginated reports. So he's going to kind of lead a little mini training session on that. And so everyone in the group has an active voice and role in helping each other.
Man, no, that's exciting stuff. It reminds me of like the way it used to be on the old listserv way back when. I'm talking about decades here, where you just had different, before YouTube and before all this other open source materials, right? You had these networks that you just learned by emailing back and forth, or maybe getting together and whatnot. So I liked the hive mind approach in teaching with this working group.
Yeah, I really love it. Was really excited. I think we had some good feedback from the first meeting, and our next one. So it's second Thursday at 2 p.m. We're going to do a little survey to see if there is a time for CCA members that works better than 2 p.m. just to ensure. But yeah, I'm really excited as we move forward. We also have a group workbook that has notes about what we talked about at the previous meeting, and then any kind of skill we teach or figure out as a group, or any training videos that people find that are free resources, we'll put it in, and that'll be, everyone in the group has access to that workbook.
So you mentioned CCAA, and I do want to get to the association, but before we do, back to the mentorship angle, just a what if scenario, or would you rather type of scenario there. You're a mentor, you have maybe an analyst just starting out that you're mentoring, and while there wouldn't be an either or, I'm going to give you an either or. And so would you guide them more towards honing in on their technical skills, or learning more about the crime and more about the department, the behavior of the city that the department's in?
Yeah, so if they're just starting out, that's the balance you got to find, really, is between those two. I feel like a lot of times in learning the technical skills, you're gonna get to understanding the department's data, right? So when I was learning to build out Power BIs, I was using the department's data, and in doing so, I actually learned about what's going on. Was that my goal at the time? No, but it was kind of a 2-for-1 deal. Obviously, you need to be able to answer the whatever random question the chief's going to ask you, as they like to do. So you need to know that information. So I kind of like stair step, focus a little bit on the technical skill here, focus on your department a little bit. So whether it be, okay, on Tuesdays, I know they have command staff meetings or squad meetings. I'm going to try and be a part of these meetings, see what information I can find out about the department, what people know on that day. But then on Wednesday, I'm going to go sit and I'm going to watch a webinar on Microsoft Access, because that's a skill that I need to learn, right? And as they're equally as important, I don't know if you can 100% learn about your department's data and the crime and everything without the technical skills, outside of asking patrol or whoever what the problems are. If you really want to know, you got to have those skills.
Yeah. I think it's a lot easier for analysts to learn the technical skills, because most of it's right there in front of them, right? You might have difficulties either getting access to data or maybe even learning a particular skill. But behind the desk, in front of the computer, that's a natural path for analysts. I think where a lot of analysts struggle, and I think I was even in this boat as well, is getting out from the desk and being part of community meetings or going on enough ride-alongs or gathering information other than what the computer told you, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's that struggle there is getting yourself acclimated to see stuff that's going out in the streets or going out in the community and just gathering that kind of information to go along with the data that you're studying.
And that's yeah, I mean, it kind of leads into my like advice that I try to give analysts, because a lot of analysts are going to focus on making sure there's technical skills there, to not neglect your soft skills.
Mm.
Because I feel like that's what has made me as good an analyst as I am, is having those, honestly honing them in from being a patrol officer, being able to negotiate or clearly communicate what it is, what my needs are, not being afraid to go. And I know not all analysts are extroverts, but I'm not afraid to walk into a briefing room and sit down with patrol and just chit chat to figure out what's going on. Having those skills is really vital to having a full picture as an analyst.
Now, do you feel that those soft skills are teachable to everybody? Like you mentioned introverts, and
Yeah.
while it's going to be more difficult for them, it's still teachable.
Oh, 100%. It's going to be them stepping outside of their comfort zone,
Mm-hmm.
but that is part of their challenge.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to be my challenge. I'm going to have struggle in different areas. My biggest challenge is knowing when to stay quiet, right? I have the opposite problem.
Read the
So,
room.
yeah. And I've had to learn my lesson the hard way. I'm not gonna lie. There's a couple times in the
Yeah,
command staff, I'm like, but what about this? And they're like, that
yeah,
has nothing to do
you
with.
and me both.
Oh, okay, got it, got it.
Yeah. So, and I hear that a lot on this show is about the soft skills. And it always just amazes me. I hear that a lot, and yet you go to an analyst conference or you look at analyst training, and there is nothing out there on teaching these soft skills. Or it's just, or I would say it's very few and far between. And the fact that it's teachable, it seems to me that should be something that us as a community, law enforcement analysts, should be teaching.
Yeah, it's something I'm actually working on a presentation to hopefully present soon, leadership for analysts, and working very hard to incorporate ways to be a leader for different personality types, right? Because what being a leader looks like to me as an extrovert is going to be different than what it looks like to be a leader as an introvert, and using your strengths with your personality to be able to convey whatever it is or empower others or so forth.
Mm-hmm. But can you teach these soft skills through a presentation? I mean,
No, it
aren't they
takes
going to
practice.
learn through doing, right?
Yeah, it definitely takes practice. It's repetition and being involved in incidents where you have the opportunity to use those skills, which you
Mm-hmm.
can't necessarily do in a presentation. Even police officers like to train in mock scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
That only goes so far as really having, and I think it takes the drive in someone to say, hey, I remember we talked about this 3-step process for me to work through these kind of incidents. And each time you face the incident, maybe the first time you apply step 1 because
Mm-hmm.
you thought about it, is there, and next time you're gonna, I apply step 1 and step 2. It's kind of like a lot of mental health professionals talk about creating new neural pathways. It's the same way with learning soft skills. You've got to, the first time you might only think about it and not do anything, but eventually the more you think about it, the more you start to do it, it'll become natural.
Good deal. All right, let's get to CCAA then. So you're a couple months past the conference, your first conference. So how you feeling a couple months out?
Woo, man, that was my first big conference of being a
Mm-hmm.
part of on a board level. I feel really good about how it went. We're really
Mm-hmm.
excited as we start to think about next year. We're still at the very initial phases of where we're going to be, and hopefully we were able to make that decision and announce that soon. But we definitely learned a lot. It was first year doing the breakout rooms, learning what our technology capabilities and AV capabilities are, and our capacity for what our members want to learn. It was quite the experience. We also learned there is not enough of us on the board to be everywhere. So that's why we taking on volunteers to be able to help us to make sure everything runs smoothly and that we give the best possible training that we can.
Yeah, it is. And how many members do you have approximately?
We are between 160 and 170.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we were at like 130 before the conference, so we've had a good jump, and we still have a steady flow of people coming in and learning what CCAA is. So I'm pretty excited.
And then how many were at the conference? Do you remember?
We had about 150, and we did have like 10 students.
Yeah.
And so that's the other thing. Yeah, is making sure it's part of the mentoring is getting these students in and getting them connected to this network. One, to help them find a job, and two, setting them up for success once they get in there. So it was really awesome. The students presented their research, and they did an amazing job. I was super impressed.
That was the ice cream social, right?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Nice.
I'm all for ice cream, so
yes.
Know that I will be pushing for ice cream in some form or fashion again.
No, yeah. So that hopefully that allows the students to talk and not the analyst, right? Let the student talk. You eat ice cream and let the student talk.
Exactly.
Well played. Well played. All right. So what's next for CCAA?
Yeah, so we're trying to figure that out. Like we said, we're just getting established with the user group. We're working on doing more training webinars. We have Andrew Wheeler coming up here shortly. We discussed a couple different options for a webinar also in June, trying to bring in different outside people, not just board members, to present on various topics. We looked at the survey feedback from the conference, trying to incorporate the feedback from the representatives on what they want to hear, what they need to learn, what skills they feel like they're missing.
Yeah, I just overall, what was the message that you got from the surveys? What are they hoping for?
Yeah, so I think there's some CDR analysis. There was some more the in-depth data and pattern stuff that Andrew Wheeler had presented on. More people wanted to be in the room than were able to, unfortunately, for that space. So having him being able to present, I think, will be really great. Some more like the automation class we had, people really loved it, but there were certain topics, even with the large chunk of time that they felt they didn't really get a time to hone in on one specific part of that, like hone in on Access or hone in on Power BI or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
Charlie went over a lot. It was a lot of good information, but to be able to pick one specific thing to kind of do.
Yeah, that's Charlie Giberti for those that might not know who Charlie is, but Charlie, it's funny because he'll tell me, he's like, yeah, I get invited to, they ask me, oh, can you teach automation? They're like, I was like, yeah, sure. He's like, you have 45 minutes. I'm like,
yeah.
Like, how am I supposed to teach automation in 45 minutes, right? You have to be more specific.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he could teach like a week on that.
Yes.
He's probably going to kill me for saying that. He's like, no.
No, I think he would. I mean, I think he'd rather have a week than 45 minutes. Like, how am I supposed to cover this topic in 45 minutes? So, very good. Well, hey, you know what? You should teach your soft skills. That's what I'm going to plug for you. You should, next year, you should have a session there on soft skills and get them actually out there doing, right? Even if you have to keep it to a smaller group. So, my big pet peeve of these conferences and training is it's too much lecture base. It's too much sit there and listen, and it's not interactive, and it's tough sometimes, especially if conferences that an analyst has to go back and will tell us what you learned, and it's like, oh, well, I mean, a lot of information, but I don't know what I can actually bring back that's going to be tangible.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I think that's why people really enjoyed the master classes that we did this year, to being able to follow along and actually do the skills that they were learning.
I see you got, as I mentioned in your intro, you got a master's in public administration, which you got recently. So what has that master's degree done for you is basically the question I'm asking for you. Now that you got it kind of later after your career was established, and it's been a couple of years. So what is your evaluation of that master's for you?
Yeah, one, it set me apart from other candidates applying to be crime analysts, because there's a lot of us going for one position within the department. So as far as just a resume builder, it's definitely helped there. Two, in part of getting my master's, had to do a strategic planning, essentially thesis of a topic of my choice, and having to in detail go through that really helped me to understand how command staff think and some of the processes they have to consider. So being able to talk kind of their language is very helpful in understanding all of that. I also had to do public budgeting. So understanding when I'm asking for this new analyst tool or to go to a conference, what it looks like beyond my request, I think is very helpful. So my minor is in ethical leadership, or not my minor, it was my concentration, which again, really focus on those soft skills. And I have read so many leadership articles and books that it was more drilled into my head. Like I said, that repetition really helps. So yeah.
You need to write a book, Self-Help for Self-Help.
Yeah. I like the Nemo, just keep swimming. I'm just like, just keep doing it.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, well, let's finish up with personal interest then. And one of the things you get into is you play co-ed soccer.
Yeah, I play in over 30 league. Woo! Co-ed soccer once a week. Half the guys are patrol officers and the other half are like soccer dads that they have children that play on the same team as some of the police officers. Really enjoy it. Definitely got my workout this last week. Being co-ed, there has to be at least one female on the field. Otherwise, you play a man down. And needless to say, I was the only female that showed up on our team.
Oh, okay. Man. And so I'm interested to know that dynamic of that you said is over 30, and that dynamic of having at least one female on the field. How have you experienced that? I mean, are they like treating you just like another guy, or is there certain unspoken rules? How does that all play out on the field?
Oh no, they're super supportive, and it's actually they're joking as I'm like exhausted second half on the field. We had like 10 minutes left in the game, and they could tell I was dying.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, Kassie gets her own pitcher of beer. Like the whole pitcher's hers after somebody's buying it, so they're super, super supportive. We have a good time after the games. We kind of hang out a little bit and chit chat and just hang out. So it's good.
Yeah, soccer to me is a lot of running around too.
Oh yeah. I'm still sore.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I always tell the story when my son went from playing soccer to playing baseball. And I was like, those are like the two opposite sports. Yeah. Baseball, you're basically standing around most of the time hoping the ball comes to you. And in soccer, you're running around, everybody's chasing the ball the entire time.
Yeah, it's funny. Growing up, my parents made me try a season of like all the different sports that were available in our area. And I remember the baseball season or softball. I was so bored. I was bored out of my mind. I was like, this is the worst sport. And I'm sorry for any baseball, softball fans, but I don't mind watching it. I'm not going to play it though.
Yeah. No, and I think that's what's interesting. I'm not a huge soccer fan, but like I actually like to watch soccer with soccer fans and watch them get excited and they explain stuff of what's going on, because I don't know what to look. It's a lot of times I don't know what to look for, type of thing.
They get into it. Especially we have the Wake Med soccer arena here. It's pretty big. Yeah, people get real into their soccer.
Yeah, it is interesting. So, all right, very good. Well, our last segment of the show is Words to the World, and this is where you can promote any idea that you wish. Kassie, what are your words to the world?
Remember that your mental health matters, and I say this from a work-life balance. I think a lot of young, driven analysts really try to just be the most exemplary employee. You can do that and still go home and shut off and not check your emails when you're not working. Work-life balance. Just really focus on that.
Very good. Well, I leave every guest with you've given me just enough to talk bad about you later. But I do appreciate you being on the show, Kassie. Thank you so much, and you be safe.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me.
Thank you for making it to the end of another episode of Analyst Talk with Jason Elder. You can show your support by sharing this and other episodes found on our website at www.leapodcasts.com. If you have a topic you would like us to cover or have a suggestion for our next guest, please send us an email at leapodcasts@gmail.com. Till next time, analysts, keep talking.